Picking up from where we were last Thursday, I think we were on coffee.
Tea. No, we were on tea, and then we were talking about how
We started coffee, no? Okay,
All I have written, like, the last thing under tea is British East India.
Okay, yeah, so tea becomes a big product sold by the British East India Company in the 1700s. And they get a monopoly to sell to the colonies in America in the 1700s as well, too. Because of so much smuggling going on in the American colonies, though, in 1773, Parliament tries to pass an act to actually make the tea cheaper for the colonists to be able to buy and directly sell to the colonists, because they had a warehouse at first in England, then had to sell it to the colonies. The colonies still had to pay a tea tax, which upset them, and several other issues too made them upset, not just the tea. But basically, they felt like this was the breaking point where they're tired of all this taxation without representation. So they had the Boston Tea Party in 1773, which sparked this whole trickle-down effect that led to the revolution a couple of years later. But yeah, so tea was a hot commodity with the British East India Company selling it with in general. But it was supposed to be big in the colonies, but it was a big problem that led to the revolution. All right, the other item is coffee. Everybody's good on tea? Okay. Coffee was unknown in Europe before the 1500s until an Arab pilgrim introduced it to traders. So coffee was unknown to Europeans before 1500s until an Arab pilgrim introduced it to traders. The Dutch were the first Europeans to enter the coffee biz. The Dutch were the first Europeans to enter the coffee business. And their plantations for coffee beans were like in Sri Lanka, Ceylon, and Java. So all their coffee bean plantations were like in India, Indonesian area, not in actual in Americas. And if you recall, coffee was actually from Old or New World. Old, so it got introduced to the Americas, although we think a lot of that comes from the Americas even now. So Dutch kind of created first in their plantations. The French eventually grew coffee in the Caribbean because they had a good climate for it. So the French eventually grow coffee in the Caribbean. The Spanish and Portuguese will grow it in the Central and South America as well. So the French will eventually grow it in the Caribbean. Spanish and Portuguese grow it in Central and South America as well. So after the protest against British tea, coffee became America's hot beverage of choice.
Was that a pun?
Yes. So following protests against British tea monopolies, coffee became America's hot beverage of choice. So those are all the major products being sold, affecting a lot of trade here in the 1700s. Obviously, it affects laws. It helps create rules to the colonies, mercantilism, all that gets factored in by these products. Sugar probably being the number one of all these items. Okay, lastly, agricultural exchanges in European nutrition. A host of new foods from the New World became part of European diets. So a host of new foods from the New World became a part of European diets. While Europeans once had only wheat as the major source of carbohydrates, after the 1400s, they now have new things like corn, potatoes, and other items as well too. So while Europeans once only had wheat as a source of carbohydrates, they now have things like corn and potatoes in the 1500s and beyond. Yes? Sure. Yeah. Check it out. Good luck and just keep us updated on what's going on. Okay. So basically, it's a whole lot easier to produce these crops, especially potatoes. An acre of any one of these New World crops yielded twice as many calories as an acre of wheat. So an acre of any of these New World crops could develop twice as many calories as an acre of wheat in general. Other foods included avocados, beans. Other foods included avocados, beans, cacao, CACAO. Chocolate.
Just the way you said it.
Chilies. Papayas. Peanuts. Pineapples. So avocados, beans, cacao, chilies, papayas, peanuts, pineapples, pumpkins, squashes, sweet potatoes. So avocados, beans, cacao, chili, papaya, peanuts, pineapples, pumpkins, squashes, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, and turkeys. All of this just made it easier for Europeans to develop or have access to more food, more calories, thus living longer, more population, so on and so on. Guys, get on all those?
I didn't write
Listen,
anything. I was just
you
saying.
can rebel all you want.
It's
Like this train's still running. So like,
No, I think she should go whenever you're talking about
Yeah.
specific crops.
Yeah.
It's just the New World crops made like healthier and like
Right.
more.
And more calories, those kind of things too, and more options. Like all they had was like bread before.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I got the sum of it.
Yeah. This exchange of crops across the Atlantic and around the world enriched both Europe and its colonies and provided many benefits. This exchange of crops around the Atlantic and around the world enriched both Europe and its colonies and provided many benefits. And I have 4 benefits for you.
Oh, joy.
All right.
You can still be.
Number 1, starvation.
Oh, wait, what?
Hang on. Let me finish the sentence. Starvation, which had previously limited European growth, largely disappears. So starvation largely disappears, which had once been a big problem for Europeans.
Oh,
Yeah, there you
you're confusing.
go. Let me finish the sentence first. So starvation dramatically declines because there's more access to food. Like again, potatoes. Potatoes is like the thing because like now, if you're dirt poor, you can grow your potatoes in the ground and survive off of that. It's the Irish, right?
Are you calling the Irish dirt poor? That's kind of
Yes.
racist.
They were literally dirt poor back then. Like the British forced them to be that way.
I don't know.
It's not. Oh, that's racist.
That's not racist.
It's a nationality more than race.
Yeah. The production and plentiful potato crops helped alleviate the famines that have plagued Europe for centuries. So even the lowest people could produce something like potatoes and survive with more calories now than before. A half acre of potatoes could feed a family for a year. So a half acre of potatoes could feed a family for a year. So that's a huge addition to European food supply. Number 2, people's tastes and dietetic diversity expanded. People's taste and dietetic diversity expanded. Yeah,
They're often nutmeg.
exactly. People's taste and dietetic diversity expanded, contributing to better health and longevity. So it helped lead to better health. People are not eating just bread all the time or whatever, or nothing at all. They're eating actual fruits with different nutrients in it. 3. Europe's soaring population resulted in greater immigration to the New World and more agricultural trade because more people going over there results in more production of crops because you have more farmers. So basically, you're getting bigger population. Only release valve for a lot of these countries like England is to have them do what? Leave, right? Because there's not many opportunities with the increased population in the 1700s. So they leave to go to America. Thus, you get more farmers. Thus, you get more product. Yes.
Dumb question, sorry, but what are these numbers for? Like, what
This is for like how agricultural exchanges and affected European nutrition.
Okay, so nutrition. So
Yeah.
what was number 3 again?
3 is Europe's soaring population resulted in greater immigration to the New World and more ag trade.
Okay, so immigration and trade.
Right, increase. But it's because you get more people, thus they have to do something. So a lot of them leave to go to colonies. Thus you have more farmers. Thus you get more products. That's what happens to the price of crops and more availability as well too, right? 4, and last one 4. Old world crops thrived in the Americas, giving the colonists even better food choices than their counterparts in Europe. So old world crops, again, because a lot of times they have better climates than Europe does. Old world crops thrived in the Americas, giving colonists even better food choices than their counterparts in Europe. All right, and lastly, opportunities from this foreign trade. So colonial expansion fueled economic and social growth in Europe from the 1500s to 1800s. So colonial expansion fueled economic and social growth in Europe from the 15 to 1600s. I'm sorry, 15 to 1800s. Sorry, 15 1800s. So colonial expansion fueled economic and social growth in Europe from the 15 to 1800s. On the import side, Europe factories, industries benefited from the influx of raw materials, new raw materials.
You said something in economic.
Social growth.
Social and economic growth.
Yes, in Europe. So the import side, factories, as they develop, will have access to more raw materials, thus able to make more goods. And people's health also improve with new food crops. So people's health also improve with new food crops. Cheap labor from either slavery or indentured servants, like England had. Cheap labor generated massive fortunes for families and a lot of taxable wealth. So it also helped governments make money too, because now you can tax all this. So cheap labor generated massive fortunes and huge amounts of taxable wealth. On the export side, mercantilist monopolies and tariffs secured markets for European finished goods, as we've already said, basically, right? So on the export side, Britain knows they're going to be able to sell to who? Their colonies, thus making money. It's guaranteed money, right? And they can basically charge a higher rate for it. Even if they allow for some smuggling, they can charge a higher rate for it because they know they're going to buy it from them. So it's going to generate them money either way. So Europe was developing into an economic powerhouse. This is one of the reasons why China is left behind, because China was better advanced than Europe was earlier on, but because of isolation, its own forced isolation, same thing with Japan, same thing with like Korea, they're going to get left behind by the 1800s. Whereas Europe's developing all this wealth and technology and development, and they're not keeping up. All right. Questions about any of this? Trade. Everything good? Okay. All right. Last little bit from this chapter. Worldwide commercial rivalries. With European nations engaged in ongoing wars for land and power on the continent. So with European nations engaged in ongoing wars for power and land on the actual continent, it's no wonder that these struggles spilled over into a quest for control of the rest of the world. So just like we talked about these various wars being a continental, fight, Spanish War, Spanish Succession, Austrian Succession, whatever, those turn into other bigger fights, other parts of the world, not just in Europe itself.
So European nations are like fighting over colonies?
Well, yes, basically. And not just colonies, but what's valuable from the colonies.
The materials?
As well as the trade itself. Yeah, lumber or whatever the case is, sugar cane or whatever it is. It's also the climate. Remember, like we said before, like they knew about sugar cane before. What was the problem with Europeans? There was nowhere to grow it, right? And now you have places you can, so who controls that land controls that money, right? So, a combination of military and economic factors influenced commercial rivalries in the 1700s. A combination of military and economic factors influenced commercial rivalries in the 1700s. So, a combination of military and economic factors influenced commercial rivalries in the 1700s. 6 examples.
Wait, what was the sentence you said before that?
I said a combination of military and economic factors influenced commercial rivalries in the 1700s. I'm about to give you 6 examples now.
I have a question.
Yes.
Who are you trying to flex on when you write these notes?
I'm trying to flex on everybody. This is where I'm getting my notes
Why
from.
do you just use eloquent words? Like we're teenagers. You can literally
I like it.
What did I say? It was eloquent.
Like you were like this is the economic and social.
They're just so long, sometimes I have to choose one.
No. This is also like no. This is not my. This is not my verbiage. This is not my verbiage. This is not me just trying to like use. It's a lot of times what the text I'm using to get the
Okay,
notes
what
wrong.
you say and like.
I like it. Keep doing it. It's preparing us for college.
It's also more or less.
I don't want your
No. But it's also more or less like the verbiage the test is going to use. That's one of the reasons why I don't want to necessarily dilute it. See what I'm saying?
Can you repeat that sentence?
Sure. A combination of military and economic factors influenced commercial rivalries in the 1700s. So let me give you examples and it'll probably all make sense. All right.
Well, you basically, you were just like social, economic.
I feel bad we never make him.
What we were saying, like it was basically like the fights in Europe that were fought over land and territory spilled over the colonies, and that's where I went to the combination of economic and military factors. And I haven't given you the factors yet. Just go along.
I don't know why.
Let me give you the factors and let's see if it makes sense. All right. Number one. One reason for these factors to fight each other, or rivalries, is the growth of trade and mercantilism, what we've been talking about. So the growth of trade and mercantilism is one of the reasons for these worldwide conflicts. So the worldwide growth of trade and mercantilism, countries realizing how valuable these colonies and trade can be.
How about mercantilism was like dying?
No. He says last week too. He said, remember that while the idea itself was challenged in the late 1700s, Adam Smith doesn't write his things until 1776, right? Doesn't mean the government's adopted. Mercantilism is basically the policy of most countries until like the early 1800s. So we're kind of talking about trade. When we say we're talking in broad strokes here, right? Broad strokes. We're not going very chronological necessarily. We're talking more thematic in this unit. All right, sorry. That's kind of more or less how the course is set up. 2, the dominance of Europe's growing industrial power. Another reason for the rivalries, right? The growing industrial strength of Europe, especially with Britain. So the growing importance of industrial power in Europe is another reason for this fight or fighting. 3.
How is that? Wait.
Well, it goes back to for like crops and goods. Like the more I can manufacture from raw materials, the more dominance I have. Thus, I want to have more colonies. So it's like industry just makes those things more and more profitable, right? Like textiles. 3. A rising need to find markets for machine-made goods. So now that industries are producing these machine-made goods, now I got to do what? I got to sell the things. So the more places I colonize, the more territory I own, guess what? More people to buy it.
So a rising need
for more markets, basically. A rising need for more markets to sell your factory-made goods to. So a rising need for more markets to sell your machine-made goods to. All right. So if you're in the backyard building birdhouses, right, and you make like 12 birdhouses, like I need to sell these to somebody. You just go take over my next door neighbor's house and force them to buy it from me. Boom. Ready-made market. Exactly what's happening. Yeah.
That's what I should do with Dominic said. Just colonize my neighborhood.
Exactly. Now you have to buy from me. You can't go to Rouse's anymore. You got to buy from me.
Make some roadblocks.
Exactly. All right. 4. A reliance on the use of Africans to ensure European wealth industrialization. Slave trade becomes huge, right? Slavery makes these items production cheap. So the ability to control the slave trade or have slaves is huge in the 1700s. Asiento, exactly. Yes, still very much thing. Yes.
Who was the last to have it? Who still has it?
No one has it now.
Well, I mean, but who has the document?
It goes eventually reverts back to the Spanish at the end there, but the British have it for a lot of the early 1700s. 5. The buildup of the British and French navies to control the seas resulted in increased naval warfare. There's a lot of British and French naval fighting in the 1700s. So the development of the British and French navies resulted in a lot of naval warfare. Correct. And 6, It's also the time where the Spanish, Portuguese, and the Dutch decline in the 1700s. So the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the Dutch also decline as well in this century. It's all about the British and French in the 1700s in terms of dominance. Okay, so that's why there are rivalries developing, right? Does that make sense now?
Wait, what was 6? I'm sorry.
6 is the declining naval dominance of Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch.
You just said that they were built up.
No, I said this is all about the French and British. The
Okay.
Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch were in decline. So all those are reasons why they're an increased what in the 1700s? Yeah, commercial rivalries, and we'll